No, it will be recorded. So thanks. I see a couple familiar faces, which is terrific. But if I haven't had a chance to meet you before, please know that I'm located in the basement. My name's Dulcie Kirsting-Lark. I'm in the basement of the university library, and folks are always welcome to come for a visit. But I am excited to share with you today a little bit about why I think it's important to integrate primary sources into classroom discussions, classroom assignments, and maybe give you some suggestions on where to start if you're interested in that, and how to go about utilizing the fabulous collections that we have here at the University of Idaho on our campus, as well as ones that you can access online. And we're scheduled for an hour today. We might not go that full hour, but I'm happy to have some time at the end for questions and answers. And of course, you'll see my email is here on the screen. I'll provide it to you again at the end of the workshop, and I'm not very hard to find. I'm the only Dulcie in the library. So we will go ahead and get started with, let's start from the beginning, teaching with primary sources in special collections. So our agenda today is we're going to do, I'm going to introduce myself, just a little bit about my background. I would love to hear, I don't think we're a really big group, so if you're willing to unmute yourself and share a little bit about why you wanted to do this workshop today, that would be great. We'll just take a few minutes for that. Then we're going to kind of think about what is a primary source, why would you want to use a primary source in your classroom instruction, offers some strategies for using primary sources. And then finally, once I've thoroughly convinced you that primary sources are a great thing for you to have in your classroom, then we can think about where you might find those primary sources. And like I said, I'll make sure there's some time at the end for some questions and answers. So, as I said, a little bit about me. I am the head of Special Collections and Archives, which is a department within the university library. Special Collections and Archives started really with a rare book collection many, many years ago, over 100 years ago, as part of the original university library. Since that time, we've acquired a lot of manuscripts and university archives. And so now we have approximately 30,000 cubic feet of material that we care for in primarily the basement of the library is where it's stored. I am actually a historian by training. I'm a public historian, but I've worked at the university library now for 2.5 years. And I'm very glad to be working in this archival space and working as an archivist in my day-to-day life. But I really enjoy the process of making primary sources relevant to students' lives. And experiences that I had in graduate school really kind of taught me about the value of that. So I would love if folks would, I think if I look at it this way, I'll be able to see many of you who are here in the here in our session. So I see Amanda. Amanda, would you like to introduce yourself and maybe just say why you decided to sign up for this?
Sure, absolutely. Here, I can turn on my video. Well, one little connection I have is that my son Henry is working at the Historical Society right now, doing volunteer work, so that's been cool. I work in COGS in the grad student support programming, and so I'm just super interested to learn more about this. It's not necessarily for my studies, but I am fascinated by this one and haven't learned a lot about it in the past, so more of a general knowledge to be able to pass it on for others.
Terrific. Thank you for being here. Nathan?
Yeah, hi. Dulce, good to see you again. Yeah, I registered because this is a term I learned from you, I think, is I'd like to boost my archival IQ at any chance I can. So that's why I decided to come and check out the presentation today. I've registered for all of them so far, and I've learned quite a bit at each one. So happy to be at this one.
That's wonderful. Let's see. Ashish, am I saying that correctly?
Yes, that's correct. Hi, this is Ashish. I am third-year PhD student. I am doing PhD here. Now I am in Twin Falls Research and Extension Center. Sorry, my camera. Oh, sorry, it's recording.
We see you.
So yeah. So in future, I have planned to go in academia. So I think this quality will enrich my teaching profession that I can apply in future. That's why I attend this seminar. Thank you.
That's terrific. Thank you. Jade? And if you don't want to answer, I'll go ahead and pass, although if you want to jump back in at some point, Jade. And then Michael, I think maybe Michael, you're attending so that you know what we're up to here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the director of grad support here in the College of Graduate Studies, and I work with Julissa on this. So, but also very interested in it and have used primary sources and papers I've written in the past, and just interested to learn more generally. So, thanks.
Terrific. Well, thank you. And I see in the chat, Jade, that you said some general grad school knowledge. So that's awesome. Well, thank you all for indulging me. I like to know why folks or what folks are hoping to get out of any workshop or session that I present. So that helps me as we move forward. So let's get into what is a primary source. So my first question, and I would love if you're willing to participate in this conversation, that would be great. How do you define a primary source versus a secondary source? And like I said, we're a pretty small group, so feel free to just unmute if you have a thought on how you would define a primary versus a secondary source. Julissa reminds me, or share in the chat as well. Thanks, Julissa.
Well, I can just share kind of my perspective as the social sciences librarian and some of my disciplines. A primary source is often kind of seen as something maybe of its time. So a diary entry, an interview transcript, like survey data might be a primary source, where the secondary source might be the interpretation of that information or applying it in some other area.
Spoken like a true librarian. Thank you, Julissa. Yeah, I mean, oftentimes a really shorthand understanding of it is a primary source is sort of a firsthand account, and a secondary source is an interpretation or a use of that firsthand account. I think I've got some more questions here for us. So can folks think of what some examples maybe of primary sources that they've encountered or that come to mind when you think of firsthand accounts? Census records, that's great, Amanda. That can provide a lot of great information for sure. Journal entries, yeah, you can see that's sort of this image that I've got pulled up here. It's labeled as a scrapbook, but this is somebody's sort of daily entries. Yeah, photographs. Photographs are a great example of a primary source. Interviews, yeah. Oral histories or written accounts of interviews. Those are all really great examples. Descriptions of original research, especially in the sciences. Thank you, Julissa. I'm so glad that somebody from the social sciences is here, because my mind's always going to go to the humanities. Maps are a great example as well, Amanda. So where have you as a student encountered primary sources? Either in a class or in a reading? What are some ways that you've interacted with primary sources in your academic life?
Well, just to chime in instead of using the chat there, I spend a lot of time sifting through newspaper archives. I really enjoy newspaper articles as primary sources. I've noticed you come upon quite a bit of material you might not have expected to find when you're doing researches in those types of archives.
Yeah, newspapers are a great example. Yeah. Amanda says she does a lot of survey research, so lots of surveys with data from kids and adults yeah, that collection of data is really valuable as well. So I'm gonna give a little bit of an answer here, but a primary source as defined by the Society of American Archivists, which is sort of our general professional body for the work that I do, is material that contains firsthand accounts of events and that was created contemporaneous to those events or later recalled by an eyewitness. So that's a very simple definition. And I think it's one that's really useful when you're working, if you find yourself teaching and you're trying to convey to undergraduate students the difference between a primary and a secondary source. This is going to be very similar to the sort of definition that they're going to come from high school with. And a secondary source is a work that is not based on the direct observation of or evidence directly associated with the subject, but instead relies on sources of information. And it's a work that's commenting on other primary sources or reviews, criticism, and commentaries. And so a secondary source is like a monograph that you might encounter in a class. It's textbooks. It can be, different narrativized versions of events that are trying to combine multiple sources of evidence to tell sort of a singular story or make a singular point. Of course, these are really simple, and the idea that primary and secondary sources are totally just categories that are either A or B is really misleading, and I think the farther you get into your studies, the more that you'll recognize that sometimes primary sources are secondary sources, sometimes secondary sources act as primary sources, so it's a little more complicated. So Amanda's asking, are there levels of secondary sources, like books about interpretations of historical events? So many layers. So yes, there are definitely secondary sources that are about secondary sources. I think there's one way that you can conceptualize that when that secondary source is analyzing those other books, sometimes they're treating those earlier books as primary sources. So this is what we're getting into in the gray area a little bit. But a good example for me is if you were to look at a textbook from 1950s, teaching an American history course, and it's the textbook, it was produced as a secondary source, but of course it is no longer a secondary source. It is really a primary source about how we thought about education in the 50s, how we thought about teaching American history in the 50s. So if you approach it from that manner, you're using it to understand teaching principles, then really it's become a primary source because you're wanting to understand the contemporary times in which it was produced. Does that make sense?
It does. That's very interesting. Thanks.
Yeah. So it's there's never simple answers in any of our studies. And we historians really like to complicate things as well. So I just want to add this little bit of information from the Society of American Archivists. So primary sources emphasize the lack of intermediaries between the thing or event being studied and reports of those things. So the key to a primary source tends to be that there's no intermediary intervention between the thing that is being recorded and the person doing the recording. So examples of primary sources, we'll get into this in a minute, but like letters and business records and newspaper articles that were contemporaneous to the events, like you suggested, Nathan, that describe those are all traditionally considered primary sources. And although the reporter may have compiled the story from witness accounts, say in the newspaper, rather than being an eyewitness, we can still consider that a primary source. Artifacts and specimens, so tangible things, not just paper or photographs, can also be primary evidence. So I've got, we've sort of started thinking about what are some examples, but I've got a list here for you. And of course, I can't help myself but share some examples from our own archives here. But Things like personal documents, journals were mentioned, diaries, correspondence back and forth between individuals. Those are all examples of primary sources. Official documents, those might be government records. They might be, enrollment paperwork for a university student. We certainly have lots of examples of that in our university archives. Business records are really valuable, especially if you're thinking about sort of developments of technology or economic choices that were made. So business records are really valuable. Photographs, as Amanda suggested, photographs are a great way. And I find that photographs tend to be one of the most engaging ways to bring primary sources into the classroom because they are so accessible. And publications. So we talked a little about this, but you might think of something like a government publication. We are a government documents repository at the university library, but maybe USDA publications from World War II tell you a lot about the idea of victory gardens and how, Americans were really asked to grow their own food and be self-sufficient. So some of those official publications can be really insightful. Audio recordings, Nathan suggested interviews, but oral history recordings, recordings of radio shows, audio recordings, I also lump into their video recordings, depending on what kind of era you're working with in terms of primary sources. There's video that you could rely on, and sometimes that's been digitized, other times, you can engage with it in the medium in which it was produced. And finally, objects. And objects sometimes take a little more skill, but they can be really engaging to bring into the classroom. They just take a little bit more work to interpret. So I'll just offer that the items that you see up here. So in the upper left corner is a picture of some houses from the city of Potlatch, which is in the northern part of Latah County, where the same county Moscow is in. Potlatch was a company town developed by the Potlatch Lumber Corporation and was a true company town where they owned all the housing, all the infrastructure in the town. And these fairly nice homes that you see in that corner picture were the company bosses' homes. So great questions you can ask students about sort of life in a town where the place that you work also owns all the infrastructure of your community. You could talk about why some people had nicer houses than others. Great questions that could be prompted from this. The upper right-hand corner is actually an invoice for some security services that were purchased by a mining company in North Idaho during some labor disputes in the early 20th century. Great way to engage students about how were companies trying to restrict the activities of unions, what were the unions working for, that sort of thing. The lower left-hand corner is an example of a map, which Amanda suggested would be a great primary source. Maps are really fun, especially if it's of a place where your students are kind of familiar with. They can orient themselves. This is actually a segment of a campus planning map from the 1930s for the university. Great way to get students thinking about what was the intention behind our university's design, and what were the ultimate outcomes, and why might one not be the same as the other. And then in the lower right-hand corner are actually a pair of Ella Fitzgerald shoes that are in our, that we hold in our repository. And those are a great piece of sort of like cultural history and a great way for students to think about what can an object tell us. So why should we even bother to use primary sources? And I want to just acknowledge that I know that creating class content is really labor intensive. And so I recognize that, coming up whole cloth with some sort of assignment based on a primary source sometimes can feel daunting because you think, oh, I have to really like create this from the ground up and I don't know how successful it's going to be. But I can assure you there are a lot of great ways that we can be of assistance in my department. And also there's a lot of great models that exist already where you kind of plug in the most reasonable primary source, something that's related to what you're teaching, and you can kind of plug and play. And I'll share some of those in a minute. But some kind of overarching reasons. One, it really sparks curiosity or engagement with a novel medium. It's got this sort of cool factor, and I know I might sound like I'm aging myself. That I'm like, whoa, kids these days, what do they even care about? But I tell you what, no matter what age the student is, whether they're a really traditional 18-year-old undergraduate or they're a non-traditional student who's coming back to school, whatever the case may be, I have yet to see a classroom come and visit the archives and not be kind of enamored by cool old stuff. It's just really novel. We don't have an opportunity to interact with authentic materials all that often in our daily lives. And so there's something kind of special about getting to interact with a quote unquote real original artifact from the past. It's a great way to teach critical thinking skills, evidence analysis, and argument development. So students, I think, are most comfortable with learning from the sort of textbook format of this is what you should know. This is how this event played out. This is how this information came to be understood. We are telling you what you should know about it. You know, the textbook developer, the course developer, we just tell you. And because those secondary sources are based on an analysis of primary sources, they're sort of eliminating that hard work of, well, what do you think about what happened? How would you make sense of this information that is not really specifically telling you how C followed B followed A. So what I think is that it's really helpful to teach students how to look at evidence themselves and think, what does this tell me about the question that I'm being posed by my professor? What order do I think these events happened in? Why do I think people reacted in this way to this this event or cause? And finally, you can use primary sources to illustrate how scholarship is made up of source material, and then that source material is passed through a lens of interpretation. So again, sort of pulling back the curtain on the scholarship that we are all involved with at the University of Idaho. We're all engaged in the production of new knowledge, but that new knowledge is based on something. We're not just pulling it out of thin air. We are making educated arguments, and that educated argument is based on primary source information. So really teaching students from their very first encounters in the university that is our goal, is that we are synthesizing the data that is available to us into something that is usable for our fellow humans. The last thing, and this gets a little bit to the comment that Nathan made at the beginning about archival intelligence, but it's something that I'm very interested in, and that is that beyond having an understanding of the knowledge of your particular subject field, and beyond being able to look at a, say, photograph and understand what it might be able to tell you, there is something to understand about why archives exist in the way that they do. And archives are sort of a catch-all term for where you might find big caches of primary sources available to you. And so basically, using primary sources is kind of a unique thing to offer in your course. I think it sets educators apart. And it's something that at the size of the University of Idaho really is possible because we don't have giant classes, which make it kind of hard to deal with original material. And we do have access to archives here. So I just want to offer that it's also sort of like, it's a really cool and kind of innovative thing to incorporate primary sources into your teaching. So I have some strategies for using primary sources, and I'm going to offer you 3 basic strategies, knowing that we don't have infinite time together today. And I just want to preface this by saying, again, I'm very happy to communicate with anybody after the workshop if you'd like to think through maybe some different ideas or really flesh out any of these ideas. But these are 3 strategies that I have found are really useful when I'm invited into a classroom to teach. So the first is taking a singular primary source, something that is related to the content of the class, and then really doing a deep analysis of it. And there are a few different sort of pedagogical tools that you can employ here. I really get a kick out of the like soapstone one because it's just the most complicated acronym. But what you would do is you would, let's say you pick out, you take that first image that I shared with you, which is an excerpt out of an individual's sort of daily journal diary. And you would ask students to think, who is the speaker? Who is creating this? Why were they creating it? What was the occasion for it? For whom was it being created? Who was the audience? The purpose of it, what were they intending to convey? So beyond the occasion, what was the ultimate goal of it? What is the subject? What is the tone? And then the evidence is sort of the soapstone acronym. Usually doesn't have the E capitalized, but the evidence really helps contextualize a primary source. And that is what other evidence might we gather to understand the truthfulness of the primary source we're looking at? How might we situate it? What else could we learn? So that first example I showed you of that primary source, the journal pages were from a diary that a college student kept during the 1918 flu pandemic. And it has sort of thoughts about the sickness spreading and how students were reacting, how the university was reacting. And so you would ask students, like, what other evidence would you want to have a better understanding of this time, of the occasion and the purpose that this speaker is writing to? So that's kind of a fun exercise. Doing it in pairs would be really useful. But you can also, it would be a great, send home, take home assignment. So you could do it both in class or you could do it at home. And then when you come back, when you gather that assignment, you'd be able to see, sort of assess where students are in their ability to understand these primary sources. A couple of other really straightforward ways to have students just begin engaging with these primary sources would be a see, think, wonder exercise. What do they see? What do they think about what they see? And what does that leave them wondering? An iteration of that would be a surprising, interesting, troubling exercise. What surprises them about the source? What interests them? What troubles them? Again, any of these are great as sort of a paired activity in small groups or even as individuals. A second way that you could utilize primary sources in the classroom would be to use a collection of primary sources. So you would, as the course facilitator, you would curate a small collection of primary sources that relate to a subject. So if we take the example of the mining wars, the labor wars in North Idaho during the early 20th century, you might take a copy of one of those invoices for security services. You might take a telegram between a mining corporation executive and in the field and somebody who's in a corporate office back east. You might get some diary entries from miners who were involved in the strike. You might get a photograph. So you would pick kind of a sampling of items that are from various perspectives, these firsthand accounts from various perspectives. And you would offer them up as a small collection and then have a group work together to think about what the primary sources tell them about the subject that you're trying to teach about. And then beyond what they see, really ask them, what do they feel like is missing? Whose perspective is not being represented? What questions are they left with? And so just as important when you're using primary sources, just as important as asking students what they learned from something is asking them what is still yet to be understood. And that is really a key difference between using a primary source and a secondary source. Primary sources, we just by their very nature are never going to be comprehensive understandings of a subject because they're from a singular in the moment perspective. And so really getting students to understand how a secondary source is created using multiple perspectives, and the author of that secondary source is making choices about the importance of each of those perspectives as they create their narrative is this is a really valuable way to teach that, sort of like, this is how the sausage is made. These are how the ingredients come together to create the final product. And then the third way that I wanted to offer is comparing a secondary source interpretation to one or more of the primary sources that are referenced within that. This is, I think, again, I'm coming from the perspective of a humanities discipline, but certainly I'm sure that there are ways that this applies in the social sciences and even in the sciences. And this is really, this is what good researchers do, right? They look at the footnotes, they look at the references, and they take the time to determine whether the author of the study they're reading has interpreted the evidence in a satisfactory way. And that is the same with text-based primary sources. Being able to show students that they also could look at an oral history and determine whether they believe that it says that, that the interviewee said what the author thought they said is really valuable. Also, it's a way to teach students how to mine footnotes to get more information, which is, sort of a research skill that upper division students really benefit from, is thinking about, okay, I like what this author is saying and I'd like to understand more, or I'm troubled by something they're saying. How do I engage with this and create my own thoughts as an up and coming scholar myself? And so teaching them to use the footnotes to find those resources is really valuable. So those are just 3 examples. And before I move on, I want to ask if there are any questions about any of these specific methods. Well, there's some other tips I'll share along the way, but just wanted to check in first and see if anybody has questions. All right, I will keep going. Questions are welcome at any time. So these are a few, we will share these slides at the end, but these are a few just kind of pedagogical resources that you might find useful if you are looking to incorporate primary sources into your classroom, into a course assignment, or even just into a single classroom bit of instruction. There's this great Teaching with Primary Sources bibliography, which is a whole list of articles about teaching with primary sources. So some great research is available there if you'd like to kind of really dig into the enumerated benefits of teaching with primary sources. 7 Strategies for Teaching Primary Sources is a great resource as well. It's from the Newberry Library. It's probably most useful for 100, 200 level instruction. They're very straightforward assignments, but they can always be modified to be more complex or more enriching for upper division students. And then finally, the Teaching with Documents, which is a resource from the National Archives. And that's another great opportunity to learn about techniques for teaching with documents in your classroom. That's really focused on documents and photographs. If you're looking for maybe better resources on teaching with objects, I would suggest one, either reaching out to our colleagues on campus in the anthropology lab, the Bowers lab, or searching for, kind of anthropological or museum studies resources related to teaching with primary sources. So I hope I have thoroughly convinced you that it is worth your time and effort to teach with primary sources. So now the question is, where do you even find primary sources? And I think this is the last one I have programmed, but I am going to ask you to participate one more time and let me know where you think you might find primary sources if you wanted to incorporate them.
Well, just to chime in again, and you already mentioned it, but the mining notes from secondary sources, I think is a good way to get your eyes on, at least for me, has been a good way to get my eyes on some primary sources, which tend to lead to the discovery of more primary sources.
Yeah. Other thoughts on where you might find primary sources? The basement of the library. You heard me, Amanda. Thank you. Oh, I don't know where my picture went. Hold on. Here we go. Okay. Maybe it's timing out on me. Seems upset with me. So I offered a few clues, visual clues here with my photos. But there are a lot of primary sources now available online. There are, of course, primary sources available to you in your libraries and in your library archives. That's true here on our campus. And if you end up at another academic campus somewhere in your career, that is undoubtedly true in those libraries as well. I would also encourage you to think about even public libraries in the communities that you're serving, or historical societies that tend to maintain some sort of archive or library. And, you know, you can treat people as primary sources. You know, invite in speakers to talk about their firsthand recollections of an event that you might be talking about or teaching, or if you're thinking about maybe you know, something in the social sciences or even a scientific subject, people could speak to what it was like in an era before information was understood, or what their experiences were like during a particular political season or event. So there are lots of ways that you can find firsthand accounts. They don't always have to be written or published in some way. So I'm offering them here: physical repositories, digital collections, primary source readers. Primary source readers, if you're not familiar, those are the sorts of books that you can assign that are basically collections of documents, historic documents, reproduced text, at least from them. Sometimes they have a little bit of interpretation or an introduction with them. You know, a really, you know, well-known example might be a collected edition of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence and a bunch of those founding documents from the US, from the federal government. And those can be great access points, and you can still teach them as primary sources, even if they're not in the format, the kind of original handwritten format. Oh, my slides are feeling finicky. There we go. Students' personal collections. This is a really fun way to engage students as well. Ask them what they might have in their dorm room, in their apartment, or in their family homes that sort of help capture a moment in time. Family photographs, diaries, yearbooks. These are all great examples of things that you could ask a student to practice their primary source reading skills on. And then public spaces. Public spaces are a really fun one, asking students to think about reading the landscape as a source of information, reading architecture as a source of information, public monuments and statues. Those are really great and engaging, and they encourage students to think creatively about the environment that they're in, especially here on our campus when so many of our students are coming to us from outside of Moscow. It's another great thing to connect them to our university. So here at the University of Idaho Library, if you are looking for primary source material, you would like students to physically access them or relate to information that has some sort of connection to our region and our university. We have at the library, obviously, my department, Special Collections and Archives. I will say that our specializations tend to be in regional, North Idaho, Greater Inland Northwest history, as well as University of Idaho history. Because of the Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival's legacy, we do have a fairly significant collection on the history of jazz that is not just about the festival, but about the industry as a whole. We have a pretty big science fiction collection that we acquired not that many years ago. And then we have a lot that has to do with the environment, with resource extraction from our environment, as well as the results of that resource extraction. So great information available here in physical form that students can interact with in person. We also have a lot of digital collections, and those are things that have primarily, they are materials that have come from our physical collection that have been digitized. They've been scanned, they've been photographed, they've been converted from audio, from an audio tape into an MP3 file. And they are available online through this hyperlink that's there, and Jaleesa dropped it in the chat for us. Those collections are available 24 hours a day. Students can use them from the comfort of their own rooms or in the classroom in real time. And those are really great teaching tools. And we've really had an eye in creating our digital collections on materials that would be useful to instructors and to students along the way. We have over 120 individual topics covered in our digital collection. So I really encourage you to explore those when you have a chance. And then because we named so many other types of materials that count as primary sources, I'll just offer that outside of my department and outside of my sort of purview of control in the library, there are many other different forms of media that could be used in primary source lessons. Maps, we have a whole room devoted to maps. We have a lot of aerial photographs, which are a great way to track change over time in the environment. We have back issues of publications, including some very old ones. We have like Harper's Weekly, which goes back to the Civil War era. So those are a great thing that we can, they're not circulating, but that we can pull for you. Older book titles, as we discussed, sometimes using a book that is from a previous era, you can talk about the era in which it was published, even if the material inside of it feels outdated. This is really useful, I think, when you're considering the progression of social science methodology, to think about how sociologists approach their work in the 1930s or 40s is much different than how we approach it today. And so looking at the publications of those fields over time is really instructive. And we also maintain a pretty significant newspaper collection, a lot of which is on microfilm. And we're always happy to show you how to use the or any student how to use the microfilm readers. I always like to point out that besides the library, we also have a number of collections, teaching collections on campus that are objects, but are considered still primary sources and can be really fun to incorporate into classrooms. I've mentioned already the Bowers Lab of Anthropology. I've included these hyperlinks here. Jaleesa's dropping all of them into the chat. If there's one that kind of catches your eye, they all have a presence on on the university's website. So the Anthropology Lab has a lot of material culture related to mostly 19th and 20th century settler colonial history in our region, but it's got a number of other things, and it is also home to the Asian American Comparative Collection, which is a great, another great resource. The Layla Old Historic Costume Collection is one of those hidden gems. They have thousands of pieces of historic clothing that are housed within the FCS department, but it's a really fabulous collection. So it's a great way to think about not only they use it in FCS to teach kind of design over time and fabric technology, apparel technology, but it's also great material culture history. The Stillinger Herbarium and the Barr Entomological Museum both have teaching collections of vegetation and bugs, respectively. So all really great teaching tools on campus. There's even more opportunities to utilize collections that are on campus and as primary sources. These are just some of the best organized ones on campus. So we have a little less than 10 minutes left together today, I think. I'm checking my time. Yep, about 10 minutes. So the final link that is in here that Jaleesa is going to put into the chat is the exploring our holdings by visiting Archives West. And that is where we keep all of our finding aids. And I'm going to try to navigate if I click on this, let's see. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. And then I'm going to share this. Okay. Can you all see this page that says Archives West on it? Yes, great, thank you. So this is where we keep a catalog, a running list of all of the materials that are available in our archives for people to use in their research, in their teaching, that are accessible to the general public. And I just want to pull one up for you to kind of give you just like the very top level details of what a finding aid looks like. So these Lauren Finn's papers, Lauren Finn's was a former professor at the University of Idaho. The things that you really want to pay attention to when you're using a finding aid, the title gives you a lot of information. The collection number is really important to note down if you ever want to come and visit it. This will be really important information to share with the archivist or the person working in the special collections so they know what to pull out for you. And then when you think about the quantity, there are 14 cubic feet. That means that there are basically 14 reasonably sized boxes that have information. And that means you will want to really look through the detailed description of the collection to determine what it is you might want to see. And you would just let the archivist know, oh gosh, I'm really interested in knowing more about the publications that Lauren worked on. So I'd like to see box 8 and folder 187 from this collection. So that is like a very, very quick version of how you would read one of these finding aids. It's basically a glorified inventory list of what is in each collection. And right here, if you want to look for something, you would just put in, oh, I'm interested in natural resources and search, and it will return the results for you. And you can see that there's 81 finding aids, and you could peruse as you see fit. Again, I cannot share and I cannot say this enough. Just be sure to contact us, and we are happy to help connect you to the resources that make sense for you. Okay, so I'm going to stop that share and do one more share here, and we will do this and share this screen. And so we're doing that, and I'm going to put this up because I don't want to forget. Jaleesa specifically asked me to make sure I share this information. But before I totally wrap it up, are there any other questions that I might answer for folks or thoughts that they'd like to share, comments?
Well, if no one else has any questions, I had a question that's kind of a curiosity.
Yeah.
I read, in Rafe Gibbs' history of University of Idaho in '62, he talked about a gentleman from Washington who gifted 17 barrels of a time capsule, Cheney, I believe is his name, that were stored in the UI basement to be unlocked in 2010. I'm just curious, were those open in 2010? And do you guys retain the material from that time
They
capsule?
were opened. I must confess, most time capsules are a letdown. They're rarely as cool as we hope they are. So yes, it's quite a volume of material. We still are holding on to it. It was a lot of things like old copies of Time magazines.
Okay, yeah, it was like I said, it was more of a curiosity. Of course, I'm probably one of the people that would be let down. I probably have pretty high hopes when I hear a time capsule from the 20th century. So.
Yeah, generally we hope for really unique and rare material, and it's often not that. Often time capsules are also spoiled by the environment. They're rarely as watertight as people hope they are over, say, 100 years of time. And they're never just like a box of gold coins, which would also be cool.
Yeah, okay. So a lot to sift through and a few things of note. It was the takeaway then, huh?
Correct, but they are here. So if anybody ever wants to see the barrels, I'm happy to.
Next time I'm there, I'll probably
Next
stop
time.
by just to say I saw them. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah.
Dulcie, you mentioned kind of some of those strategies for incorporating primary sources, special collections, and archives into teaching. Do you have any examples that you'd be willing to share about how Special Collections has partnered with grad students, faculty, or instructors on campus?
Sure, yeah. There is a course in the journalism department about the history of mass media and culture, and that's a really fun class to have students come and visit us here in our reading room, and we bring out a variety of printed materials from the last, let's say, 100 years, and students are invited to think through some of those kind of overarching questions. Who made it? Why was it made? What was the purpose of it? You know, especially when you're thinking in the terms of journalism and mass media, who paid to have it printed, what audience was it serving, what would the audience have thought about it? What was the reception going to be? So that's quite fun. And for that class, we have in the past pulled old University of Idaho yearbooks. We've pulled old student newspapers. We've pulled newsletters. So like sort of from the 60s and 70s, mimeographed newsletters. So students also get a chance to see different production methods of mass media over time. For a history of photography class, we pulled a variety of original photographs, different mediums that they were produced in our holdings. We've got everything from kind of modern plastic photo negatives all the way back to glass lantern slides. And so that's a great way for students to really get a tangible feel for the way technology has evolved.
Great, thanks, Dulcie.
Yeah. All right. Well, knowing that we are just about out of time, I do want to just draw your attention to the last couple of slides. So there are a variety of previous grad student essentials workshops that are available through the library's website. And I think Jaleesa will throw this last link in the chat. But these workshops were all recorded in the past. So if there's a topic that this semester's series isn't covering, but you're interested in, please take advantage of these recorded resources. There is one more of these Graduate Student Essentials fall workshops next Wednesday, the Make Data Management Easier, and there's still time to sign up for that. And there might be one more slide. And thank you. Thank you from the University of Idaho Library. So if there's as I said, if there is anything that Special Collections and Archives can do to enhance your teaching while you're here on campus, please don't hesitate to reach out. I am Dulcie, D-U-L-C-E, like sweet in Spanish, at uidaho.edu. But we're very easy to find. Our library website is full of resources, and you will find our emails easily if you want to reach out and set up an appointment. We are happy to kind of custom prepare access to primary sources.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Everybody have a great day.